Mrs. Slurdy was already at the gate when Jack woke up. Her sandals were gone from the door. Her rosary was not on the nightstand where she always left it. Jack stood in the doorway of the farmhouse and looked at the empty road. It was not yet 6 in the morning. The mist was still low over the rice fields. He picked up his phone. He did not call her. He put the phone back down. He already knew where she had gone. Tu Tien came out behind him, one hand pulling her hair back. She looked at the empty road. She looked at Jack. "How long has she been gone?" "I don't know. I was asleep." Tu Tien reached for her jacket on the hook by the door. Jack shook his head once. "Let her go alone." Tu Tien stopped. She looked at him carefully. "Jack? She is 62 years old, and she walked out before sunrise. She knows the road." Jack sat down on the porch step. His voice was quiet. "She has known that road for 35 years. She just never let herself walk it." The frangipani tree was in full bloom. Mrs. Lodi stood at the low stone wall at the back of the property and did not move. She had not moved for a long time. The white flowers were scattered on the grass around her feet. The trunk was thick, twisted, the kind of trunk that grows only when a tree has been left completely alone for decades. She put one hand on the bark. Her fingers moved slowly over it, the way you touch something you thought you had lost. She did not hear Dung come up behind her. He had seen her from the farmhouse window, a small dark figure standing at the back wall before the sun was fully up, and he had walked out without thinking. Now he stood 10 meters away and could not move either. He had planted this tree 35 years ago. He had never told anyone. He had never come back to see it. He had assumed it died in the first dry season, because things you plant alone and do not tend usually do. It had not died. Mrs. Lodi turned around. Her eyes were red. Not from crying, she had not cried. From the kind of pressure that builds behind the eyes when something hits you too suddenly and your body does not know yet whether to grieve or to feel relieved. "You planted it for me," she said. Not a question. Dung did not answer immediately. The morning birds were very loud. A rooster somewhere behind the tree line called once and stopped. "Yes," he said. "And you never told me." "No, Mrs. Lodi looked back at the tree. Her hand was still on the bark. "I walked past this land 100 times in 40 years, Dung. On the way to market, on the way to church, on the way to my husband's grave." Her voice did not break. It stayed very level, the way water stays level in a bowl even when your hands are shaking. "I walked past this tree 100 times and I never knew." Dung took 3 steps closer. He stopped again. "Lode, don't." She shook her head. Small, firm. "Not yet. Let me stand here for a minute." He stopped. He stood in the early morning light and let her have the minute. Jack found them there 20 minutes later. He had driven slowly, windows down. He had parked at the road and walked the rest of the way on foot so the engine would not break whatever was happening. He stood at the edge of the property and watched. His mother was sitting on the low stone wall. Dung was sitting beside her, not close, leaving a careful space between them. They were not talking. They were just sitting together in front of the frangipani tree. In the early morning, the way 2 people sit when words have already been said and the silence that comes after is not empty but full. Jack turned around. He walked back to the truck. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time. He did not start the engine. His father had been a good man. He had built a family. He had worked hard. He had loved Mrs. Lodi in the way practical men love, by staying, by providing, by never leaving. But he had never planted a tree on a piece of land just because she had once mentioned she liked the view. Jack pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. He stayed like that for a moment. Then he started the engine and drove back to the farm. Tu Tien was in the kitchen when he got back. She had made rice and eggs. She had set 3 places at the table. She looked up when Jack walked in. "How were they?" sitting together, not talking. Tu Tien nodded slowly. She turned back to the stove. Then she stopped. She turned around again. Jack. Yes. Come here. Her voice had changed. Jack crossed the kitchen in 4 steps. Tu Tien was standing at the far end of the table, near the window. On the table, beside the rice bowls, was a small wooden box. The lid was open. Inside, a folded yellow paper, a dried frangipani flower, a black and white photograph, and Tu Tien was holding a second piece of paper unfolded, smoothed flat with her palm. Jack looked at it. Hon Uk, a marriage contract, handwritten, 35 years old, Trun Vun Dung. His name was there at the bottom, in careful brushwork. Signed. The ink had faded to brown, but the signature was clear. Beside it, the line for the second name, Ho Thi Lori, blank. Tu Tien's hand was shaking slightly. Not much, just enough that the paper trembled. She left the box on the table, Tu Tien said. She didn't take it with her. She forgot it. Jack. Tu Tien looked at him. She did not forget it. She left it here on purpose. She left it where I would find it. The kitchen was very quiet. She wanted someone to know, Tu Tien said. Before she decided anything, she wanted someone else to hold this first. Jack looked at the blank line beside his mother's name. 35 years. The paper had yellowed. The flower had dried to almost nothing. The signature on Bac Dung's line had waited this entire time without fading. She's going to sign it, Jack said. I know. Today. Tu Tien folded the paper carefully. She placed it back in the box. She did not close the lid. That afternoon, Bac Dung stood in the frame of the half-built house. The walls were up to chest height. The roof beams were not in yet. You could see the sky through the open top. He was holding a flat piece of reclaimed wood, old, smooth, the kind of wood that has been something else before. He had been holding it for an hour. Jack sat on a stack of timber nearby. He watched the older man turn the wood over in his hands. Back. Yes. What are you going to put on it? Bac Dung ran his thumb along the grain of the wood. A name. For the house. Every house should have a name. What name? The older man was quiet for a long time. A bird landed on the top of the unfinished wall and looked at them both and flew away. I don't know yet, Bac Dung said. I need permission before I know. Jack nodded. He did not push. He had learned, in the past month, that Bac Dung spoke in the same rhythm as the man planted trees slowly, with intention, without explaining himself, until the moment was right. Bac. Jack leaned forward, both elbows on his knees. Can I ask you something? Yes. Were you ever angry? All those years. Watching her build a life with someone else. Watching us grow up. Coming to every birthday, every funeral, every harvest. Were you ever angry? Bac Dung set the wood down carefully against the half-built wall. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Jack. Once, he said, the day of the wedding. I stood outside the church for an hour before I went in. I told myself I would not go. Then I went in anyway. He paused. Because she was happy, and I could not stay away from her happiness even when it cost me. Jack did not say anything. There was nothing to say. That was the only day, Bac Dung said. After that, no. You cannot be angry at someone for choosing the life they chose. You can only decide whether the love is worth carrying, and I decided. The afternoon light came through the open roof of the unfinished house and landed on the flat piece of wood leaning against the wall. Jack drove his mother out to the land at sunset. He had asked her quietly, over dinner, if she wanted to go. She had said yes, without hesitating. She had brought her rosary. She had brought the box. Bac Dung was already there. He was standing by the frangipani tree again, the way he had been that morning, except now the light was gold and low, and the white flowers caught it differently. Jack stopped the truck at the road. He got out. He opened his mother's door. He offered his hand. She took it and stepped down. "Go," he said quietly. "I'll wait here." Mrs. Lurie walked across the land alone. The grass was knee-high in the open areas. Her dark blouse moved with the evening wind. She walked slowly, the way she always walked, with her shoulders back and her chin level, the way Jack had always thought of as his mother's particular kind of dignity. She stopped in front of Dung. He was holding the flat piece of wood. He had not carved anything on it yet. He was just holding it. "Dung," she said. "Lurie, I walked past this land 100 times. I know. And this tree." She looked at the frangipani. The flowers were pale gold in the sunset. "You never came back to see it." "I didn't need to. I knew it was here." Mrs. Lurie opened the wooden box. She took out the folded paper. She unfolded it. She held it out toward him, not to give back, but to show him she had read it, that she knew. Dung looked at the paper. His jaw moved once. He looked away. "I drafted it the year before your wedding," he said. "I never gave it to you. I kept it because I don't know why I kept it. Perhaps because throwing it away felt like giving up, and I was not ready to give up, even when I had already lost." Mrs. Lurie reached into the box again. She took out a pen. Dung went very still. She uncapped the pen. She smoothed the paper against the flat piece of wood he was holding, using it as a surface to write on. Her hand trembled. She pressed her lips together. She signed her name. The letters were small and uneven from the shaking, but they were there. Ho Thi Loi, beside his name. After 35 years, Dung looked at the paper for a long time. Then he looked up at her. His eyes were wet in the way old men's eyes go wet without permission, without warning, the way water comes up through stone. He did not say anything. He reached out and took her hand, just held it, both of them standing in the gold light, in front of the tree, in front of the house that was still open to the sky. At the truck, Jack had turned away. He was looking out over the rice fields. Tu Tien was beside him. She had come in a separate car, quietly, because she had known. She slipped her hand into his. "Jack, I know," he said. His voice was rough. "I know. Your father would have wanted this." "Yes." He nodded once. "He would have." The sun finished setting. The light went soft and gray. Behind them, at the frangipani tree, Dung was still holding Mrs. Lurie's hand. Jack reached into his pocket for his keys. His phone lit up first. A message, unknown number. He almost put the phone away. Then he read it. "The land this house is being built on, the title deed is contested. There is a second claimant. I have the original documents from 1987. Meet me before you pour the foundation, or everything your uncle has built will be taken to court. You have 48 hours. Someone who knew your father." Jack stared at the screen. Behind him, his mother laughed a real laugh, small and surprised at something Dung had said. It was the first time Jack had heard his mother laugh like that in 4 years. He put the phone in his pocket. He turned around. He walked back toward the tree. He sat down on the stone wall a few meters away and watched the two of them in the gray evening light. Tomorrow, he would deal with it tomorrow. Tonight was theirs.